What's up, heathens? How you guys doing today? Well, we're going to be continuing our talk with an ex-Mormon, Preston, who changed the way of how he considers his evidence for his faith when he was a Mormon, and that eventually got him started on a path that led to his new position of atheism. I hope that you guys will leave a like, subscribe if you like this kind of content, and I will see you heathens after the interview. Well, I'm wondering, earlier you said that you used to use that objective mindset and that rationality to strengthen your beliefs. I'm wondering what changed between then and now. Was it just you weren't feeling all that that conviction or whatnot, or was there something else?
I think the best way to describe it would be, we mentioned before about how the scientific method requires that you objectively look at your current view and try to disprove it. And once you're able to, you would either revise or replace it. However, a lot of intelligent theists have this little shelf. And that shelf is a lot of those things that don't add up, but it has to do with religion. And religion oftentimes, as I'm sure you're aware, gets the pass. We let that get the pass. We let that be the exception. I know that, I'm very objective with, for instance, buying a car. And I think most people are. Most people put more objective thought into buying a car than they do into believing in God. And, they would look at consumer reviews and they would say, well, what are the negative reviews? And if I said, hey, now that's anti-Prius. You don't want to look at the anti-Prius material. And they'd be like, what? Well, I'd like to at least take it into consideration. What are people saying about it? And is there validity? Is it just somebody saying, they're stupid, they look like vaginas, so I don't like it? Or is it there's this empirical evidence to where it might not be a good decision for you? People would objectively look at those things, but intelligent people often give religion the pass. And I think that for me, while I was used to being objective in most areas of my life, of course I was guilty of cognitive bias at times, like I think anybody, but I think it was suddenly an awareness of this shelf filled with a lot of things that didn't quite add up to me, and realizing as I was becoming more comfortable with questioning even my most closely held beliefs and convictions, as my comfort level rose with questioning those, I became more aware of this shelf and how that shelf is not compatible with healthy thinking. There was all kinds of things on that shelf, things that I previously didn't quite add up to me, and I just placed on the shelf. For instance, I don't know if you're aware, but in the LDS Church, there's the sort of the principle of confession, not quite like the Catholic Church, but if you've transgressed to a certain point, and there's ambiguous severity is what they say, where you would have to meet with your bishop and basically tell them what you've done, and they would kind of help you go through what you would need to do to repent and to make up for that, right? Oftentimes, if it's something somewhat serious, they will say, well, for a certain period of time, we're going to ask you not to take the sacrament on Sundays, which is basically communion, the bread and the water. Used to be wine, but word of wisdom. They would say you're not quite worthy for that yet, so we're going to work through this repentance process, and eventually you'll be able to take the sacrament again. Something I kind of always struggle with, because it's kind of like a public shaming thing. You're sitting there with 300 other people, and if somebody else is like, he didn't take the sacrament, clearly he's struggling with something, I'm not going to let my daughter date him. That's a entirely separate issue. But I had an experience where I shared something that I felt, I was less than worthy because of something arbitrary, now that I look back at it. But I shared this with a church leader, and he asked me an interesting question. This was prior to going to the temple. This was, to get a temple recommend. And he said, well, how long ago was this? And I said, it was about 6 months ago. And he said, oh, okay. Well, it's basically told me that since it had been a while and I hadn't done it since then, it was pretty clear that I had kind of worked through that repentance process and that I was good to go. And he gave me a temple recommend, and I didn't have to abstain from taking the sacrament. The thing that stuck out in my mind that I had to put on this shelf was, if I had told him it was last week, he would not have given me the recommend and would have said I would need to not take the sacrament and really work through this whole process. And in my mind, I was like, it doesn't make sense. Sometimes I would have had to go through this because they say, well, you have to confess it and you have to, not take the sacrament in order to properly repent. And then if I did take the sacrament and I wasn't worthy, it would add to the sin. But it was 6 months ago. I did continue to take the sacrament, and I didn't need to confess it to go through the proper thing. And he said, yeah, no, you're good. You're repented. Here you go. And at the time, it was this clash. I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, I was like, I don't know. But I was like, well, God works in mysterious ways. I don't know what I said exactly to justify it, but I just kind of put it on the shelf. Because while I don't fully understand that, I do at least know that it's true. So I got to kind of process through it. So I'm going to put it on the back burner. So that's an example of some of the things that even early on I was being objective about and recognized there was an issue with, but wasn't willing to, as another apostle said, don't sacrifice all the things you do know for a few things that you don't know. It's a very clever thing to say, and it was a really something where you're like, yeah, you know what, I'm gonna stay strong and keep my faith, and so I'll just put that up there. But when you become aware of that shelf and see how much is on there, and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that one, and I think it was very enlightening to realize just how much I was compartmentalizing and aware of how much everybody does and how few are willing to even acknowledge that shelf. And not just acknowledge it, sort through it, perform an audit on that shelf and really weigh it against everything. So yeah, it was very interesting.
Well, I'm kind of curious, like, after you started analyzing, all those things that were on the shelf, like that process of going through everything and unpacking it all and dealing with it, did like friends and family like start to notice like a change in you? And if they did, like, how did they react to that?
I think so. For a while, I was very private about it because I didn't know where it was going to go one way or the other. I was really trying to work through it so that I could be the person I was professing to be. I professed to be a very strong, member of the church, and I realized I need to take a step back and, hopefully, if all goes well, be who I profess to be. But I was unwilling to pretend to be somebody that I knew deep down that I wasn't at that level. And so I really wanted to kind of either fix that and get back up or really just process some of that stuff. So I was really private about it. Even with my wife, she was a little worried about it, and I don't want to be a negative influence or really influence her beliefs or views, or I didn't want to play that game and deal with that. And so when I realized she was worried about it, I just kept it to myself for a long time. So we weren't living around a lot of our family at the time, and so I was able to kind of have some me time to sort through a lot of this. I did consult with some religious leaders about it, but I didn't have a lot of, we had recently moved to where we were, so I didn't have a lot of friends and family around. So I wouldn't say a lot of people noticed at that time, but once we realized that we were done, that this was not what we believed, because I was not willing to pretend to be somebody that I wasn't, we, for all intents and purposes, came out to our family, and we did it in person. We traveled up to her parents and said, look, this is what we're doing, and we want to be upfront about it. We don't want you to have a false idea of who we are or what we're doing. We went to grandparents. I mean, we wanted to be upfront, which was very hard. But it was, that came as a result of, visiting, people coming and visiting and us having to pretend, oh, tell us about your ward. Oh yeah, they're really nice. And, I'm not about that. I don't like pretending to be somebody I'm not. So, I think that really looking, what got us to that point was, obviously looking at a lot of these facts and a lot of these things that happened around the organization of the church. A lot of these things that I wasn't aware of, and maybe things that I was aware of but was not willing to really play out in my mind. As I was researching, and I dedicated more time and study and research to this than anything else in my life. 2 to 3 hours a day for months and months. I have hundreds of pages of notes. And I was looking, there's a lot, and here's the thing, there was a lot of information that I came across that I realized was true. This did happen, but was irrelevant for me because I was trying to answer 2 questions. The only 2 questions I was interested in answering was Joseph Smith a prophet of God? And is the Book of Mormon true? Is the Book of Mormon the Word of God? So if I came across a piece of information, whether or not I had verified it, because maybe it was just slanderous anti-Mormon material, maybe it wasn't. But I wouldn't even pay it a second thought unless I was able to successfully determine that if this claim were true, it would play a role or impact answering one of those 2 questions. So, there's I don't know if you know about the what are they called? The Kinderhook plates. I don't know if you've heard about those, but it was these small silver tablets that somebody claimed to have found, and they gave them to Joseph Smith to translate, and he said it was a history of some dude, I don't remember the name, we'll call him Nimrod because it's a great name from the Bible, but he gave some, Hebrew-like name and said it was the story about, this guy, and he gave this whole account of what this guy's life story was based off of these plates. And the plates were later found to be a forgery, and we still have them. Unlike the golden plates, we have the Kinderhook plates, and we have the papyrus from which he translated the Pearl of Great Price, the Book of Abraham that he has, and there's a hieroglyphic that has I think the god Horus over, and he says it was standing over, or is Abraham standing over Isaac, and we have those 2 things, both of which under scrutiny have been found to be completely false. The first one was just a burial document and had nothing to do with Abraham or Isaac or anything. And it would make sense because he got it from a mummy exhibit, and it would make sense that a burial document was with the mummy. And then these other ones that he claimed were a story of this guy were literally forgeries and just total gibberish. So 2 out of the 3 documents that Joseph Smith claims to have translated, 2 of the 3 we have, both of which are completely false. And I'm just supposed to assume that maybe he got the other one right, things like that, I realized I came across that, and they said Kinderhook plates. I learned about them. I haven't verified whether or not that's true yet, at least at the time I hadn't. But if that were true, that plays a key role in answering, could Joseph Smith have translated the Book of Mormon? Does that play a role in determining his credibility as a prophet, seer, and revelator? So I was like, yes. So I'm going to add that to the pile of things that I'm going to further research and verify and make sure that objectively I can figure out whether or not that's true. So that was the process that I went through, answering those 2 questions. And the more things that, qualified that. And I read Joseph Smith's biography, not the one that is has more of a malicious and anti-Mormon vibe. It's the one that they actually sell at Deseret Book that is sanctioned by the LDS Church. It's his biography. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try to get, even from their perspective, what they grant as being true about Joseph Smith. So I read that and found a lot of things, about his education. While, he only had a third grade formal education, his father was a school teacher. And they had textbooks in their house. And those textbooks at that time would have been written in perfect King James English. And we would have become very familiar with King James English, which is what the Book of Mormon is written in. And, there's just a lot of things that, you start putting this all together and in the timeline. And, a common question asked by members of the church, and they ask it rhetorically, how could a boy or someone with a third grade education have written the Book of Mormon? How could somebody have done that? And they think it's like this trump card, and it's a rhetorical thing, just like, bam, how could he have done it? See? And they don't expect there to be an answer. Usually people are just like, how could he have done that? But again, I didn't want to answer it rhetorically. I was like, let's build that model. How could he have? Let's really explain how he could have, and then compare the two. And once I fully built a separate explanation, a separate model, and compared the two, after months and months of research and building it stone by stone, Occam's razor. I was just like, this is a much more viable explanation and requires a lot less far-fetched, explanation to accept. And so I just realized, wow, that's at the point when I was able to look at those two models and say, I don't believe that. This is much more believable. And it wasn't a flippant, rash and arbitrary decision. It was more thought than I had ever, and I was a missionary studying 3 hours a day every morning for 2 years, have studied a lot on this model. But finally really building this model, I realized, that's much more likely that's actually what I believe. And in the end, it's a decision. It is. I've decided to believe this, but it's because I've decided what I'm willing to accept as being truth. And so, so that was kind of the big turning point for me, was building that separate model and realizing I don't believe that. I still believed in God at the time, but I was like, that's not true. No.
Yeah, I have to say, having, or at least I wish this was more of the case in the religious community, but having a working explanation that only contained natural processes or natural things to explain, that gap that they just automatically label as God. I wish that actually convinced a lot more people. But it seems to me, and stop me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like the Mormon Church is kind of built on the ignorance of the people that choose to follow it. Like they rely on people maintaining their ignorance on certain issues in order to stay in the faith. I mean, is that kind of that's just my own assessment of it? Would you say that's correct or no?
I think to an extent that's accurate. I don't see the leaders of the church deliberately trying to design it that way. I think that's what it's become. I think that's why it's been successful, is because that's kind of the very nature of faith itself. Using emotional reasoning and or rather appeal to emotion. And I would say the LDS Church emphasizes so much more on the power of the feelings you can get through prayer and that being truth. It's something they actually honestly believe to be a true principle. And that ignorance and that culture of ignorance and encouraging that ignorance, I think, is a byproduct of that. I don't think it is by design and, the apostles getting together and saying, we got to work on our retention. So we got to get these guys to, get their heads buried in the sand and not listen to this stuff. It's my opinion that these men, the leaders of the church, honestly believe that what they believe is true. And that they have a genuine worry about the members of the church, and they worry about people leaving the church. If you claim to know something was true, you felt you actually knew it was true, and that it would bless your life, and that there's dangers by not living those things, you would have a genuine concern for people who would maybe fall short. And so it's a really tough dynamic. And that's, for a while, I was hurt by a lot of our family members who treated us, I would say, unfortunately, in a couple situations when we talked about this. But over time, I couldn't really hold it against them, because I know what they claim to know. I know what their conviction is, and I know what my decision entails in the context of their worldview. And it's really hard to combat that in a culture of not people who don't just claim to really strongly believe, but who claim to know and have the truth. It's kind of a paradox. If I claim to know that what I have is true, and you've decided to go a separate route, without forsaking my belief, I can't actually and fully condone what you're doing. I can respect your right to do so, but I can never fully accept that as a viable alternative, because I've gotten to the point where I'm a Gnostic theist. It's not even something I question. I know this is true, so I can't accept that what you're doing is a viable option even for you. And so, I don't think it's malicious. I don't think it's designed, but I think it's a byproduct of a culture and a religion strongly founded on faith and emotion, and that being a reliable path to epistemology. And so I think that's that makes it harder, because it's more subconscious. If it were by design, I think it would be more obvious to members. But because it's this faith promoting and makes you, gets you right in the feels and you feel good about it. And, when you have that constantly from all sides, you just feel strengthened in that mindset. And so it's really, really hard for somebody in that mindset to come out of it, because you can't really pull them out. They have to come out.
No, yeah, exactly. That's what I say to just about everybody that I talk to, is that, nothing that you can say directly is going to convince anybody to come out of their religion. It's themselves that have to pull themselves out. Like, they have to do exactly what you did and look at things critically.
Yeah, but I think it's still worthwhile to have the discussion, because while, yes, I had to be in the right frame of mind and be in the right, time in my life, it was the fact that I had to put things on that shelf, that eventually kind of brought my awareness. And had I not been getting more and more of these things that made me question, those are things that kind of prepared me for that and made me really willing. Okay, I've had quite a few things. The shelf's kind of getting weighed down now. Let's really take a look at it. And so I think it is important to still have that discussion, and to, at the very least, encourage objective thinking and reason with people, even if they're going to continue to be theists. I mean, using critical thinking is I think a key component to success in life, and not being taken advantage of, and healthy learning, from politics to, in your profession, to sales. If somebody's trying to sell you something at your door, you want to know how to reason and identify logical fallacies and realize how and why you would maybe reject something if it wasn't logically adding up. And so I think preparing people's minds, even whether or not it results in a change of their religious convictions, it's something I strongly believe is worth spreading and worth encouraging, especially in our youth.
No, yeah, I completely agree. Another thing that I generally say is that I want to be that sort of voice in the fog when people are starting to doubt and starting to question things. And I think that a lot of people just need, that kind of catalyst to get them thinking when they're in the right mindset. So it's still very important to speak up and I guess challenge, not necessarily like in a mean-spirited way, but just sort of challenge someone's ideas. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good, because while I had, I think, decent reasoning skills, even as a believer, I was not familiar with arguments such as, Pascal's wager and the varying sides of that. I now know 4 different ways to, come at that. There's these different arguments that I think a theist makes because they've never really had to apply or never tried to apply logic to their beliefs, and so they often commit these logical fallacies because logic has little to do with their belief. While I logically processed through a lot of it, the premise of my belief was on faith and did not have anything to do with logic, and so and didn't question whether or not there was a God, of course. And so as I learned, when I left the church, I still identified as a Christian. I was like, I feel like I'm still a Christian. So let's look at just the Bible and mainstream Christianity, and all sorts of holes started popping up, and I was just like, well, that doesn't make sense. And so I started researching more about just religion in general and some of the overarching ideas and how to really analyze those. And it was channels like your own where people were just talking about theism and atheism, just bringing that all into question, that I really started to learn how to reason through a lot of those concepts. I had never looked at the logic behind whether or not there's a God or just religion in general, and certain principles around it, and morality, whether it be objective or subjective, and a lot of these things that I never even felt a need to look into as a believer. It was all new, which is frightening, because that's like saying I never learned anything about the house that I bought, or or this really, this big decision that I made that I never really looked objectively at it. And so I agree, it's definitely worth being that voice out there, because it played a huge role in my ability to really reason through those things, and as a result become so much more confident in my way of thinking and the views that I hold. Obviously eager to change and improve those views. I think Matt Dillahunty said this, and I love it. He said, I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as I can. I love that. And I think that's the exciting thing is, let's go talk with people and have my views challenged. And if I don't change my view because it wasn't a great argument, okay, fine. That reaffirms my position. But there's almost an excitement with getting a new piece of information that, like, oh, I never really thought about that. Let me kind of, alter my view a bit. And that's, that's science, and that's, that's the path to learning. That's how we learn things. So I've enjoyed that immensely since kind of opening up that floodgate.
Hey, heathens! I'm glad that you made it to the end of the interview. If you will, please leave a comment down below with what your favorite part of the interview was. Don't forget to hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe to the channel if this is the kind of content you like. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice, and I will see you heathens later.